Hello there. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the podcast. Again, as always, traditional now. That Ralph said something wildly inappropriate to make me laugh just before coming on here. So today we're going to depart from the normal way of doing this, which so normally we pick one or two or a few topics from the week's news. But today's topic is going to be different because basically we only heard about it late on Friday night. So we are going to today we are going to talk about the implications of the Supreme Court's decision on Trump's tariffs. So basically, they said that the all these tariffs that he's slapped on everyone last year were actually illegal because they were based on something that really he shouldn't have done. So anyway, that's kind of it really, and we're gonna just talk about that. So yes, Ralph, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm on already. Normally you give me an intro, at least I can structure my thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, not today. Anyway, so yes, the Trump tariffs. I think we've talked about this on the show several times ago,
Yeah.
several times before, several months ago. And what I remember saying at some point is that as the as the indictment was sent up to the Supreme Court eventually in the second appeal, I said, well, we will have to watch that particular judgment very closely. As certainly for me personally, it will be a bit of a litmus test whether the judicial area in the United States still has clout, still is a bulwark against arbitrary actors who are trying to subvert the spirit of some laws to their own intention.
Yeah.
And at that time, of course, we didn't know, and I was unclear what was going to happen. I remember Peter and I we were discussing this on the show, and you said, well, surely the Supreme Court is going to uphold the decision that they are legal because the Supreme Court may well be in the pocket of Donald Trump. And I said it is in fact a real possibility that they might, but we just don't know. And this is precisely because this is precisely the reason why I thought it would be interesting to watch the actual result.
Yeah.
And now the Supreme Court has issued their judgment. And surprisingly, I think to you and me, the judgment was not to uphold the legality of the Trump tariffs. Now, let me first of all identify clearly what we're talking about here. These are the tariffs which were issued on the day the Trump administration calls Liberation Day. You guys remember Trump was on telly with a sort of like a poster he held up, which was a grid where the tariffs he imposed on the various countries was recorded. And you remember they used it like a spreadsheet. They applied some spurious formula which calculated these tariffs for every particular country. And if you remember, every country indeed was taxed, even those territories which were not actual countries, but islands off the Australian coast where only penguins lived, whose fish exports were now taxed. I just offer this as a light-hearted take. We're not flippant here, and this is always said. But basically, these are the tariffs we are talking about here. I'm not going to bore you again with the story. It was challenged in the court, and the Trump administration, of course, appealed to it. It landed eventually in the Supreme Court, and we were awaiting the judgment. The judgment has now come out, and the Supreme Court has said these tariffs on Liberation Day were unlawfully imposed on the basis of the law which had been chosen to do so. And again, this is just as a reminder, the law on the basis of which they were they were issued has the bristly acronym IEPA, spelled
Hmm.
IEEPA, and that stands for, as far as I can remember, International Economics Emergency Policy Act, I
I think
believe.
so. Yeah, I think
If
it
that
sounds
is not
right. Yeah,
exactly right, then
it's kind of that, isn't it? Yeah.
the spirit of what I just said
Yeah.
is correct, and
Yeah.
because it is important to understand the double E's here. This is the
Yeah.
economics and this is the emergency. So in other words, and again, I'm not going to bore you with the detail now, but broadly, it gives
Hmm.
presidents of the United States the power to issue to uh, enact certain economic policies without going through Congress if certain situations prevail that are deemed and classified as an emergency. Of course, somebody has to so deem them. Somebody has to define something as an emergency.
Sorry, hold on. Just to confirm, I looked it up. So, International Emergency Economic Powers Act. There you go.
Fantastic. So the only
Yeah.
thing which I got wrong is the position of the two E's,
Yeah.
if you remember. But nobody
Yeah.
does. Nobody ever remembers what I say,
Yeah. I know.
including me.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let me I'll just speak some words and you guys put them together, whatever, like an LLM.
all the right words. Just
All the right
don't know about
words,
don't know about the order.
not exactly in the order you want them to be. It's like a puzzle.
Yeah. You don't know what you were going to say now, do you?
True to form, I forgot what I was talking about. So, right, somebody has to declare and define something to be an economic
Hmm.
emergency.
Yeah.
And the Trump administration did so. But this is, of course, the issue. The issue is that the spirit of the law gives the author of that definition, and I don't know exactly who that is. There's going to be some gremium, some committee, something which has been invoked specifically to judge whether a particular situation is an emergency or not. But anyway, the author of that definition has, of course, some form of discretion here to do this. And the spirit of the law is basically to say, well, nobody's going to abuse this. I mean, we're going to give the president the power on the presumption that the president is going to be a responsible actor and is not going to willfully abuse this in order to bypass Congress. Because the bypassing of Congress is the idea here, but it's only the idea to do this because any particular policy enactment needs to be done more quickly than it would otherwise have been possible to do if you went through Congress, which is, of course, exactly what you need to do if there is an emergency. So that's the idea here. Unfortunately, in this particular case, the Trump administration has now shown themselves to have form on, I would go as far as say, abusing the spirit of several of these emergency laws which exist in the United States,
Hmm.
declare some situation as an emergency for the express purpose to institute a policy by bypassing Congress. That's the goal, to bypass Congress, so that the Trump administration doesn't need to go through the consensus building within Congress, and Congress doesn't have to pass a consent or a writ to say that this emergency has now been imposed and the policy has now been enacted. And this is precisely the bone of contention here. This has been the bone of contention. This is why it has been sent up to various courts, and after the final appeal, it has landed in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has now said that indeed the Liberation Day tariffs are unlawful, and if you read the judgment, there are several legal arguments being made here. But one important reason is indeed that the Supreme Court has said that the nature of the dynamic that has been identified as an emergency is not actually an emergency. It cannot be construed as an emergency. And this, to me, is important because the court has not just ruled against the lawfulness of these tariffs on the basis of several, perhaps, legal niceties, legal technicalities. These are also present, but they do not form the bulk or the foundation on which this judgment rests. The foundation is that the court has basically said that the Trump administration abused the spirit of IEPA. This is me, Ralph, interpreting it this way. This wouldn't stand up in law school or so. And please leave your comments in the notes, so to speak, again, if you disagree. But my interpretation is that that is the essence of the Supreme Court judgment. Now, the reason that I find that interesting and important is, first of all, just to note that the Supreme Court retains independence and continues to act as an independent judicial organ in the United States, as of course it should, but given the Trump administration's fiber of how they have operated since they have come into power, it is by no means, one can by no means simply presume that they would. And so this is the first positive point. The second one is the ruling was 6-3, so that's a good majority there. And it is not just it can't be. I mean, the three liberal judges on the Supreme Court wouldn't have been enough to sway it. There were three conservative judges. Two of them were amongst those who Trump himself appointed to the court. And so one can see that the Supreme Court certainly retains the independence which it ought to retain, and that, I think, gives those observers of American politics and economics who are perhaps becoming concerned about the level of arbitrary decisions, hope that there is still the spirit of the law present in the United States. And there is another reason, but I'm sort of pass this back to you, otherwise I'm just talking for hours here. What are your observations so far? I've got some other points which I wanted to make later.
Yeah, I mean, I just, I think that this is great. I think this is great that actually someone has finally stood up to this onslaught, this continuous onslaught, and flooding of the zone and all of that. It's great that someone's actually pushed back against it properly, that actually has power over him. I didn't, like you say, I mean, I didn't really expect it because it just seems that everything, that all conventional wisdom has gone out the window, during this term. So I'm really pleased that someone has actually managed to do it. But then I just thought, but he's going to try. He's going to spend the whole of his time in office just stringing all this stuff out. He's got teams of advisors. He's got all that. He's got all that free legal advice that he's basically blackmailed out of all these top law firms. He's just going to string it out and string it out and string it out, and he's going to blame everyone else, as people do in these sorts of things. He's going to blame everyone else for the delays, for things not working. He's not going to take any responsibility for any of this himself. And so I think that, I hope that this continues. I hope that the judges that voted against live long and happy and healthy lives. I think that I think it would be, you do want people. This is the thing. I mean, even if I was in a position of power, I would want people to be able to question. You want people to question, decisions that you make, and to make sure that you are making the right decisions for the right people. So, I mean, I know he's basically slagged them off so far, saying there's these people have disappointed me and stuff like that. And I'm like, well,
Yes,
they're just doing what they should be doing.
indeed.
That's all they're doing.
Well, he
So,
said worse things than that. I mean, he
Mm.
said they were unpatriotic and un-American,
Yeah.
etc., etc. Predictably, he said that. So it is by no means a surprise that he did say that.
Mm.
But so this has happened, and now my two questions are: what is going to happen next?
Yeah.
And does this perhaps establish some form of legal precedent? And so I'm going to tackle these two in sequence.
Yeah.
The first one is what is going to happen next? Well, a normal person would think, well, the Supreme Court has now judged. This is
Yeah.
it. There's nothing he can do. There's no further level to which he can appeal. Now they're going to sit back and they're going to scratch their heads, and it's going to take some time for them to actually come up with a battle plan. In this world, 10 seconds later, they had instituted a global blanket 10 percentage points tariff on everything. 20 seconds later, they increased it to 15 percentage points. And so when I heard this, I was still watching the telly when the banner came up that they had done this. I was thinking, well, how is this possible? The answer is they used Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act, which is basically a trade act, an act which we have encountered before. Because I believe that, actually, you need to fact check this, I'm not entirely sure. I think that's the act on the basis of which some other tariffs have already been imposed. Now, so several things follow on from this. The first thing is, I believe they had already been pre-planning for a potential negative court judgment. That they have been planning to what are we going to do? They have asked themselves if the Supreme Court indeed would judge against us. And they had their strategy ready. Then we're just going to put 10 percentage points on everything, and we're going to use Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act. We can do this, no problem. So this is what they had done. So they knew already what they were going to do. So this is point number one. And point number two is, of course, that is exactly what they are going to do. Because IEPA is actually a block of acts, but IEPA is not the only legal basis on which you can invoke emergency situations that bypass Congress. There are several others, and we have talked about these before as well. And they have already now shown that they are going to explore, which they are, and then exploit these acts to their advantage, and in order to continue with this playbook of bypassing Congress, of governing without Congress, which is astounding in itself, that a democracy is actually having a top executive politician whose aim, it appears to be, to find ways to bypass Congress, which is, of course, Parliament. This is Keir Starmer basically saying, oh, well, whatever, I just do whatever I want. The opposite of which is true, but we are not talking about this. So, just for you,
can't do anything.
that was kind of what I meant. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, let me just, for your amusement, read out a list of things, because I've done some research here.
Nice.
Of what the sort of legal landscape is on the basis of which you can execute this playbook. There is, and I'm not going to talk about the detail, just for you to know. There is Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930, which can be so used. There is Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which can be so used. Actually, that's the one on the basis of which the other tariffs have already been imposed. So that's already been used, and it's in use, and they know how to do this. So that's another one. There is Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. There is Section 201 of the Trade Act of 1974. And this is already four things. And I've just done like some cursory looping through the acts, and I found four of these. And then, of course, also these new tariffs, which were so thriftily introduced, the 10 percentage points up to 15 percentage point. Legally, there's these are temporary. These can only be imposed for 150 days, I believe it is.
Right. Yeah.
And then this goes to Congress. Now, there's a loophole there. What you can do is basically at the end of these 150 days, you can basically say, okay, that was it. Aha, but we're going to put another 10% on the basis of another emergency, on the basis of the same act, which is then going to be in place for another 150 days. So I don't want anybody to appreciate the detail. In fact, I could talk about the detail, but I won't. All I want to guys appreciate is that there is a list, a raft of possibilities which would enable that same playbook, find something, declare an emergency, bypass Congress. So this is by no means, does this mean that the Trump administration will now stop imposing tariffs in some shape or form? And that is what is going to happen next. This has already happened, we know, with the 10 and 15 percentage points imposition of tariffs. And this is going to continue. So this is what I think the Trump administration can be expected to do in the next several years. And of course, all of these activities, were they to happen, can be challenged in the courts. But this is going to be the future. The Trump administration is going to use section whatever as a loophole. It's going to be passed to one circuit and to the next circuit and eventually land in the Supreme Court, which is going to rule either way. So that's going to be the economic policy of this country for the next several years.
Just absolutely insane. So the next, I suppose my next question really is, what does this mean for those countries who already have a trade agreement in place? Does that mean this, presumably this overrides everything? And it's, again, I would have thought it's going to be positive for some countries and negative for others. I mean, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I understand this, it would work like this. Let's say country A has let's say Germany has a trade deal in place with America, somehow modifying the tariffs which were imposed on it on Liberation Day. Now the Liberation Day tariff has been declared unlawful. So from a layman's perspective, I'm not a lawyer, but from a layman's perspective, you would now say, well, these tariffs don't exist. And therefore, a trade deal based on the modification of that tariff is now void. The subject matter which it deals with, which it modifies, has disappeared. And so the trade deal is void because it's unnecessary.
Yeah.
But it has been swiftly replaced with this 10 percentage point blanket tariff. Let's assume that is the case, that it replaces it. I know the devil is always in the detail, but let's just say for now that it replaces it. So this country would now have to say, well, we're going to now need to strike another deal with America, tackling those particular tariffs. I don't know how these negotiations will pan out in practice. Maybe an existing trade deal can just be grandfathered into a new one. Who knows? But I think what it means is a bit like, let me be flippant again. If it's Germany, they would be like, the tariffs have disappeared. Yay! And so
Mm.
5 seconds later, they're back. Ooh.
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be the reality of it. I
Yeah.
mean, the least of it is the unnecessary expense of intellectual effort and money in order to put all these trade deals into place. But that's the
Mm.
least of it. The
Mm.
economic impact, the negative economic impact on the countries targeted, and of course on the United States, who are paying these tariffs.
Mm.
Let me just be clear on this again, that this is a tax which the US domestic incumbents pay, nobody else, is
Mm.
of course going to continue.
Yeah.
And we see that it's now gaining traction. We see this everywhere in the US economy now. And we see that the Trump administration has to repeal or recede from certain things because the approval ratings are now so the negative slide is accelerating, and the Trump administration, of course, sees this, and they know that they have to recede in certain areas because the tariffs imposed on U.S. citizens are beginning to bite.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty horrendous stuff, and we're going to see more of it in this year, which is, of course, the 250th anniversary of the United States.
It is.
And I think that I stick by with my theory that what will happen at some point during this year, especially in the second half, not so much in the first half, but in the second half, I can really see him dishing out checks to people
Yeah,
and doing the whole Musk. Yeah, well, it won't be Musk. Maybe he'll do it, but get some backers to do it. Is to offer voters like $1 million if they vote for him and stuff like that. So I really think he could hand out checks like they did in
definitely.
COVID, and say and they maybe time that in with the July the 4th celebrations or shortly thereafter to really sort of hammer home the I said this to you before, but to put the pay in patriotism, and sort of here is the check. So because we're being patriotic,
That's lovely.
and so these checks can go. People can go and buy a gun or something. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm saying that, but I just can't get it out of my head.
This is more than just theory. I mean, if you
Yeah.
remember, when the Liberation Day tariffs were imposed or issued or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
they were already talking about the possibility of rebating citizens.
Yes, exactly.
And this would have been dressed up as a, I can't remember, they had some good word for it. And they were actually even thinking of, this is true, I'm not making this up. You know that the tax collection service in the US, this is the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service.
Yeah.
They were thinking of establishing something called the External Revenue Service.
Oh, God.
Again, highlighting and inventing a fictitious fact that tariffs are somehow something which is being paid by foreign countries rather than by US citizens. And when you listen to Trump, he really does believe that, because he keeps saying things like, we're taking in billions of dollars. Taking in. You're not taking this in exactly. I mean, the Treasury is taking it in, yes, from their own people. But anyway, carry on. Sorry, I cut you off.
But yeah, I mean, I think I definitely see that happening. They're gonna, they're all gonna go and buy guns and stuff. I say that again flippantly because I just remember being so just what is going on here. When they doled out the $1,500 checks to people at the beginning of COVID. And I remember someone was getting interviewed on TV and they said, what are you going to spend your $1,500 on? And this guy said, well, I've had my eye on this amazing gun that I thought I would buy. Obviously, look, obviously people were worried at that point about, pasta and toilet rolls.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
That's what is going on. So I can imagine that happening. The wheels are going to turn. He's going to spend some of his $500 million war chest for his campaign. $500 million.
Of course.
I mean, I can't stress enough how ridiculous that is. I mean, when you think over here, it feels like, let's say someone, some donor gave, I don't know, a Conservative MP like 10 grand, it's like 10 grand or something to help with the campaign.
Yeah.
And then you look at $500 million.
I tell you, if Rachel Reeves
amazing.
had $500 million, we'd all pay less tax. But let me just, because I'm aware that I actually said to you guys, I'm also going to talk about one other thing. So I'm talking about everything. But there's one thing. And this is it going to be a precedent or not? I mean, I'm not a lawyer. So basically, everybody who is our audience here, you can now start laughing at me because I clearly don't know what I'm talking about. But I would just throw it out there that it is possible that the Supreme Court's judgment today will form a precedent case which is going to make it easier for future challenges of similar type of policies to be challenged in the court. Because, as I said before, and I'm not going to read out the list again, although it would please me to do so, Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930, Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, blah, 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 the list is long. So there is a loss of opportunity here for the Trump administration to do this playbook again. And no doubt it will be challenged in the court. So it is possible that the Supreme Court's judgment here is going to form precedent which any future court case brought on a similar basis can use in order to accelerate this. And it's going to make it more difficult for the Trump administration to institute all of this. This is possible. And there is another thing which is possible because, and this is now fiction writing a little bit, I'm just going to throw it out there for you guys, because at the end of this year, we're going to have the midterms. They're going to be in November. And clearly, the Trump administration doesn't want to have midterms at all because, I mean, this is not me being polemic. I mean, Trump said this himself. I mean, he basically said very recently, a few weeks ago, he said, well, given that we accomplished so much, the question is really, should we actually even have midterms or not? So clearly, Trump himself, and these are probably thoughts which are put into his mind by his entourage, are clearly, I think, would prefer not to have the midterms. That's what I would say. Yeah. So given that the playbook elsewhere has already clearly been exerted itself to put paramilitary troops into American cities, again, purely invented catastrophes that never happened. He said, look at Portland. There are fires everywhere in Portland. Fires. Portland is just a normal city. There's nothing was burning there. He just completely invented his own reality. But the point is that on the basis of this invented reality, he actually put the National Guard into Portland. So it is by no means out of the inconceivable that he might invent a national crisis in democratic states like California, not anywhere else. It's just going to be in California and other democratic cities, which will make it too dangerous for citizens to leave the house and go to the ballot. And therefore, in light of this terrible situation, the midterms will be postponed in the interest and for the security of the citizens. Hang on a second. And then, of course, they will be postponed temporarily. Temporarily means forever. And the situation here would be that if he were to do this, again, he would have to invent an emergency. But the Supreme Court's judgment here, I think, I hope, puts a little bit of a damper on the freedom with which the Trump administration can simply invent realities on the basis, invent realities which do not exist, on the basis of which they then institute certain activities. That would be my hope. We will see.
I have to say, I think that is a very interesting point. Again, like you know, I hope that this would provide a precedent. I mean, it does put a different perspective on things with Prime Minister Starmer over here doing a U-turn on 30 council elections, isn't it? I mean, it just, you think, you know, if the equivalent would be like Starmer suddenly invents I don't know, like an insurrection in Bolton or something, and sends in the SAS. I mean, that's basically, it's kind of what it is, right?
The TA, the Territorial Army. That's the actual analogy.
Okay,
yeah.
Unbelievable.
Well,
anyway.
also, I mean, one final comment on this, just because it's amusing. I mean, Keir Starmer gets in hot waters for accepting a Taylor Swift ticket, I think. Yeah. Trump accepted a Boeing plane from Qatar.
Yeah.
And yes, there was some talk about it in the United States, but nothing ever came of it. I mean, this plane is currently being refurbished for billions of dollars of cost to be in the presidential library if he ever disappears, for him to use for him to use as a private person. And over here we go like, Keir Starmer, oh, this is unbelievable. The man has no morals.
I know. It's incredible, isn't it?
Let's put it in perspective, perhaps.
But anyway, look, we'll have to stop it there. I mean, it's so entertaining talking about this. But yeah, it just gets more and more ridiculous, doesn't it, really? So anyway, thank you very much indeed, as always.
It's getting farcical. But anyway, everything is interesting, and we will be here to comment.
Yeah, hopefully. Hopefully.
I'm not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, good stuff. Anyway, all right, well, thank you very much indeed. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time, listening, watching, etc. And
Absolutely.
I will see you back again.
And as always, thanks for having me, guys. Thanks for listening, and see you next week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.